After the news that Pierre-Luc Dubois wanted out, obviously the Jets were scrambling to start thinking about trade destinations. But you know what? Dubois might be willing to meet Winnipeg in the middle if it makes the trade easier. The Jets, as a result, could get a massive haul. We'll dive into all of this and all of the teams Dubois might be up for on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, friends, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. I am your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge, but most importantly, we just really love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, tonight's episode, like I said, a couple of topics to get through. The first, and I think the most important right now, is, of course, Pierre-Luc Dubois' trade request and what it means for the Jets, right? Winnipeg is still probably sorting through the aftermath of the request, although I'm pretty sure they were also fairly certain he wasn't going to resign. It's not like he has made it particularly secret that he wants to move on. Whether it was Columbus or Winnipeg, one or the other, Dubois had no interest in resigning with. So for the Jets, I think the biggest question is, well, if Dubois wants out, how do you maximize trade returns? And traditionally, the Jets haven't done a great job at that. They usually sit on their asset, they let it kind of depreciate, and then other teams have kind of bailed Winnipeg out. I think, you look at the Trouba trade, and the Jets kind of made out okay. It wasn't the best package that they may have been offered, but, ultimately it turned out pretty well for Winnipeg. But then you think about how the Jets kind of waited to the last second once their hand was forced, rather than being aggressive with the trade market and trying to preempt, some of the other weaker offers. And I think for me, that is a problem and a habit that the Jets have. We've seen them occasionally sit on deals until they're backed in a corner, and somehow, thus far, the Jets have generally done okay. But once in a while, they've gotten hosed on a few minor deals. Thankfully, nothing big, but this is one of the first trades where the Jets really have to kind of get it right. I mean, there's no option for them to screw this up. Winnipeg has to make the most of one of their most valuable trade pieces. And I'm not going to sit here and say that Dubois is the best player the Jets are going to trade. That's not true. Hellebuyck is still going to be that guy, and I guarantee you he's not going to be here for much longer. But for Dubois, one interesting thing that's kind of come out of all of this is that he's willing to play ball. And in that respect, he'll be willing to sign potentially a longer-term deal as part of a sign-and-trade rumor. But he'd also be okay with not just going to Montreal. He might go to, say, New York or Minnesota. Those two teams are interesting in their own right, just because, for one thing, the Wild are a divisional rival, and Winnipeg hasn't really had a big habit of trading with rivals. I don't know that it really impacts the standings all that much, but a lot of teams still have this notion that you can't help your enemies, right? Even if it might actually help you instead as well. With the Rangers, New York is certainly a team that is, for me, more of a fit for Scheifele than for Dubois. Pierre-Luc Dubois, I kind of envision going to a couple of different places, but if you're talking about players that can really push New York's top six over the edge, I'm still thinking Mark might be the safest bet. That, and he's also an expiring free agent, so New York can basically look at that as like a longer term rental and feel comfortable that cap wise, at least, they're not going to have to worry so much about Dubois coming back for multiple seasons on a massive extension. With Scheifele, obviously I think he's still a really good player, and I think he'd be the one that I would personally target if I'm looking to trade for like a free agent deadline or pre-deadline acquisition. But with Dubois, at least the Jets have like legitimate leverage because he's kind of indicated that he's willing to help expedite the process and do what he can to make himself more attractive to other teams for trades. I feel like this is pretty good from Dubois' camp, right? I know that the trade request is not great, but all that said, if they're going to be the ones advocating on Dubois' behalf and essentially helping to negotiate a future extension, which makes Dubois a more valuable trade piece, Winnipeg has a really good chance to make out like a bandit here. Interestingly, I've also seen people, especially Habs fans, commenting about, well, why won't Montreal just wait? They could certainly just wait till he hits free agency. And yeah, they could, but the likelihood that you're getting Dubois in free agency is slim to none. Now, whether you think that's a good or a bad thing is kind of a separate question. Missing out on Dubois in free agency might not be the worst thing ever, but in terms of what Montreal wants, I think they're very clear that they understand Dubois is coveted by a lot of other teams, and there's a chance that they might miss him. For me, I think they should be a little more hesitant than interested. But as a Jets fan, I'm like, please take him. Give us all this good stuff. We'll happily accept the package. But again, for a great player, obviously, this is imperative for the Jets to not screw up. And if Brisson, who is Dubois' agent, kind of does the rest, just sit back, relax, let him be the GM of sorts, and wait for those big trade hauls to come in. Because I guarantee you, if this is how it's looking and it really is a sign and trade, Dubois' value just went through the roof. So could be good for the Jets, right? Could always be happy times. Unfortunately, one of the things that kind of sours that is the notion that the Jets are still after assets that can be impact players right now. We'll dive into why I still feel this is only going to prolong Winnipeg's suffering in just a little bit. But before we go any further, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Birddogs. Birddogs are super comfortable and they make you look good. They come in plenty of styles. You might be wondering what even is a bird dog. Well, it's the only pants that comes with an interior liner, so it's basically like getting a 2-in-1. Somebody has described them as being the Lululemon of menswear, but they fit even better. And they offer a great flexible material. They use anti-stink and anti-sweat stuff that helps you wick away the sweat and keeps you cool and dry all day long, which for a lot of you folks who are constantly moving around and certainly getting active, this is a pretty good way to have comfortable and stylish pants that, still feel like they get the job done. But, if you're ready to place your order, and there's plenty of folks like you who have certainly given Birddogs a try and love them, you can go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL and enter promo code LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, everydayers, for returning to Locked On Jets as we talk about Winnipeg's trade prospects and why Winnipeg's push for players who can help now really doesn't fit this team's timeline. We've talked about it before, but again, that has come up in terms of the perspective, or at least the context of making Morrissey, Lowry, and players like him not feel that the Jets are tanking, right? Saravalli or Friedman, one of those two said something to that effect. And I guess I look at all of this and I say, at the end of the day, it is important to look out for your players and make sure that they're happy and that they're in a good competitive environment. But if you understand and see that the writing is kind of on the walls with players who are interested in moving on, then you might not have a choice. As much as the Jets have indicated that they want to be competitive next year, there's just not really ways that they can do that because they're not going to get really good roster players coming back in any of these trades. The only way that they could pull that off is if they get really lucky. And with the Jets, I don't tend to see them being the kind of team that routinely wins their trades. I think Cop for Barron Plus was a nice move, and there's a real good chance that Morgan Barron is a very legit player. But in terms of higher end assets, right? Trade pieces that might really bring you something special. The Jets don't generally have much of a track record with getting big returns. The Trouba deal was probably the biggest the Jets have done outside of the Kane swap. And as far as the Trouba deal is concerned, the Jets did okay. Getting their own first back, I think, was funny in a way. I don't remember if it was that trade or maybe it was, oh gosh, they're all starting to blur together. But either way, like the Trouba return, I forget what it even was now. It was kind of underwhelming. I mean, obviously Pionk came back, and a lot of people have their own thoughts about Pionk. I loved him for a season or two, and then we saw real Pionk kind of show up. But all of that aside, for the trade market, the package wasn't terrible. But I do feel like the Jets got better offers, and we're just waiting for something even better to come along until it didn't. And that's when they realized, well, maybe we made a mistake and overcooked it. With this mistake that I think they're really starting to make, it's focusing on the present rather than the future of this team. And look, I get it. Guys are on contracts. You don't want to throw in the towel just yet, and you're also keenly aware that playoff revenue is really important to the lifeblood of this team because it also impacts, how often we see regular season attendees coming in. The more that you win and get into the postseason, the more likely your regular season and season ticket renewals are going to be looking pretty strong the following year. So for the Jets, it's really important to have success in all facets. But the problem is when that success comes at the cost of Winnipeg's long-term future. And I still feel that their vision for this team is both unclear and not very directed, but I'm sure that they have internally at least some sort of plan to regain relevance. But until then, Winnipeg is going to try and pull scraps together from these trades. They get players back that can help them now. But, I mean, how do you get somebody who's going to help you now in a HellBuck deal? You're trading a Vezina-winning goalie for what exactly? A forward of some sort, a defender? Who even knows? And then you're talking about Scheifele and Dubois and getting players back who can help now. Who is giving, legit roster players for a Mark Scheifele? You're just not really seeing essentially a trade deadline rental being the source of a deal for major roster players. I mean, it just doesn't happen that way. And Dubois might be the only person on this team, other than maybe HellBuck, that could fetch that kind of, I guess, present time help. But I still look at this as the wrong direction for the Jets to push. And I feel long-term, even though it might be okay in the short term for their finances and stuff, long-term, I think the lack of commitment, the continued mediocrity, and moves like these where the Jets don't really make progress, it's all part of the same problem of Winnipeg kind of spinning its wheels and being stuck in this loop of being mediocre. That mushy middle that the Jets have occupied for years continues to haunt them. I'm hoping this is the first offseason where, because all of these issues are happening with the contracts, it forces Winnipeg to get creative and do something new. But I'm also not holding my breath. We know how the Jets are. We know how they've justified this kind of crap in the past. Let's hope that they've learned a few lessons this offseason and they're ready for a new direction. But until then, we are just going to sit tight and keep an eye on how the Jets do over the next few months. I'll be grading all of their offseason moves as they make them, so we'll be sure to give you some report cards on that and further details on how the Jets have handled their trades. But I thought it might also be worth taking some time to talk about another sort of Jets-related thing, but also not. It is, of course, the Florida Panthers versus the Vegas Golden Knights. Who would have thought that's your Stanley Cup final? We'll talk about game number 3 here in just a little bit. But before we go any further, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Gametime. When you're buying all sorts of event tickets or even sporting tickets, I think the most important thing is that it's convenient, right? And, well, for me, it is at least. Maybe for you, it's the price. We also love good, cheap, concerts, stuff that's even free. We also like a good last-minute deal. And Gametime is awesome because it's one of the few apps that helps you find tickets that offer last-minute pricing and flash deals. We all know that concert tickets and event tickets are always very expensive, And Gametime not only gives you the best prices in the industry, but also gives you in-venue seat views, so you can see what you're actually paying for, which is important because you might find that you're being obstructed by a pillar like you would be at the Fenway Park. But with Gametime, you can avoid all of the hassle, and again, you'll get some of the best prices around. And if you actually find a similar seat in the same row and section and it's cheaper, they will give you 110% of the difference. So you really can't go wrong with them. Be sure to snag tickets without the stress by downloading the Gametime app, and then you can create an account and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're just wrapping up really quickly with some thoughts on the Stanley Cup Finals, and somehow the Florida Panthers have survived to fight another day. They took Game 3-2 with a Carter Verhaeghe overtime winner. Probably a bit of a cathartic feeling for this Panthers team because it's not like they've been nearly as bad as the record shows, or at least in parts of these games. Other parts, they sort of just threw in the towel and, quite frankly, all of the goalies got lit up. But I feel in other stretches of these games, especially in the first halves, you see an aggressive, fast, dangerous Panthers team that's kind of been stonewalled by Adin Hill and a lot of block shots from the defenders. If we actually kind of dive into how the Panthers have played, generally speaking, you're seeing them getting down low. They're creating chaos. They're doing a lot of stuff of what you would expect a quality team to do. It was just the finishing that remained the issue. For once tonight, though, they finally got those extra goals to really make the difference and push them through to a crucial Game 3 win. Paul Maurice apparently is going to coach a Stanley Cup win before he ever did it for the Jets. So awesome. Or I guess after he ever did it for the Jets. He just never gave us that chance to make it through. Unfortunately, the team just sort of fell apart at the last second, and now he gets to live that dream with the Florida Panthers instead. It feels like a bit of a cruel twist of fate, but as Jets fans, we're used to it. We know how heartbreak is. We have felt it before, and I guess for me, watching Maurice take the Panthers to the Stanley Cup Finals is very bittersweet. I would say I disagreed with a lot of his decisions, but at the very least, he was an entertaining interview. So, yeah, I guess for the Panthers, the main thing is taking both games here at home. They really can't afford to lose the second game at home because a 3-1 series lead for Vegas heading back to their territory is basically a death sentence. There's no way to come back from that unless you got really lucky. But with how the Knights have been playing recently, I would not be counting. Excuse me. I would not be counting on fortune to carry you through. More than likely, Vegas is still going to win the series, but at least the Panthers are going to give us a bit of a fight and show us something before inevitably Vegas kind of takes control and wins it. I still think they're the favorites. I really don't see any reason to doubt them. And as much as I hate Vegas, let's be real. They're a very impressive team. They're well run. They're disciplined in some areas, maybe not so much on the ice, but certainly in terms of how they manage their roster and a lot of the trades that they've made. An annoyingly good team. The Panthers are also annoyingly good, but at least we don't hate them in the same way. So let me know who you're rooting for in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. But for tonight's episode, that is all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day. We will see you back here next week again. Thank you.